With our guest, Professor Amos Wilson, and the psychology of self-hatred among global African people. Our topic is the psychology of self-hatred among global African people. Our guest, Professor Amos Wilson, professor of psychology at the New York Institute of Technology and also at the College of New Rochelle. He's also author of the book, The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child. Professor Wilson, we had a guest who, or rather a caller just a few moments ago who raised an area with Skinner, I do believe.
Very, very important area. Because the topic of what we call Skinnerian conditioning, instrumental conditioning, is a standard topic raised in psychology. The essence of Skinnerian conditioning, or sometimes SR psychology, particularly of Skinner's type, named after B.F. Skinner, Harvard professor, who didn't so much discover new principles as just codify ways of behaving and consequences that already existed. The essence of it is that behavior is controlled by its consequences.
The topic is about mental slavery. Mental slavery can be very difficult to break away from. It is far more sinister to compare to than physical slavery. Because the chains are invisible and are transmitted across from generation to generation, mental slavery can affect how people see their own reality. It can be really tough to get free from the dark and evil perceptions. For example, it's poisoning our minds to think that Jesus is white, but we really don't know what he looks like. And that comes from us thinking that we need blue eyes and blonde hair to be pretty. It has a connection to the bluest eye because Piccola feels that she needs to have blue eyes and blonde hair to be accepted into society, which she doesn't. And by that, she slowly loses her heritage and her culture and not being who she really wants to be and thinking that she's not good enough. But although society can make you feel like you don't matter or you don't fit in, you are supposed to remember where you come from, be proud of who you are. And as an example from the movie Black Panther, you should have power and pride for who you are. And Piccola should have done that, but in the end, she ended up having mental problems because she tried so much to be like white people. She forgot and lost herself in the process trying to adopt white people's physical appearances and their mindset into thinking that she's not good enough. So that's it.
Elites as a means of maintaining white dominance and control. It is a very sophisticated racist system that is much less obvious than the overt methods used in the past, yet it is far more proficient. With a strong prevailing history of slavery in the United States, racism has always been an issue. This ingrained societal problem of racism has always necessitated that America's white elites develop and implement racist systems to defend and maintain a position of white dominance. As seen which after the abolishment of slavery, different forms of segregation were implemented, including Jim Crow laws, which invited extreme brutal mistreatment of African Americans. However, as overt racial discriminations became morally unacceptable and illegal, it became necessary to develop more sophisticated, less apparent methods. Because the past blatant systems used for ensuring the continuance of white dominance, used during the Reconstruction period through the 1960s, had become morally and socially unacceptable, this required that America's white elites develop a more sophisticated and stealthy system, a design better suited for changing times. Elites as a means of maintaining white dominance and control. It is a very sophisticated racist system that is much less obvious than the overt methods used in the past, yet it is far more proficient. With a strong prevailing history of slavery in the United States, racism has always been an issue. This ingrained societal problem of racism has always necessitated that America's white elites develop and implement racist systems to defend and maintain a position of white dominance. as seen where which after the abolishment of slavery, different forms of segregation were implemented, including Jim Crow laws, which invited extreme brutal mistreatment of African Americans. However, as overt racial discriminations became morally unacceptable and illegal, it became necessary to develop more sophisticated, less apparent methods. Because the past blatant systems used for ensuring the continuance of white dominance, used during the Reconstruction period through the 1960s, had become morally and socially unacceptable, this required that America's white elites develop a more sophisticated and stealthy system, a design better suited for changing times.
This topic is about discrimination. Let me tell you, from today's society, white supremacists and Nazi Germany should not divide us from who we are. We should not have to fight or decide what race we come from, or say or discriminate black and white difference. We should break away from the Nazi Germany and the white supremacists. Okay. Society can change your perception about the way you think about things, but you should not let their intention hurt your feelings. This topic is related to the bluest eye because society was trying to change Piccola's decisions about the way blacks are. But at the same time, she wanted the blue eyes so bad and tried to fit in. She was told by her mom that she was ugly and not worth it. So Piccola decided that she was gonna get the blue eyes, but in the end, she was just mental and not fit in. So there you go.
This person were to say his name was Patrick Murphy, you would look at him like he's insane, because Murphy is an Irish name, a European name, or the name that has a Caucasian or white background. And a yellow person, Chinese is a yellow man, and he has nothing to do or no connection whatsoever with the name Murphy. And if it doesn't look proper for a person who is yellow or Chinese to be walking around named Murphy or Jones or Johnson or Bunch or Powell, I think it would be just as improper for a black person or the so-called Negro in this country, as we're taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to walk around with these names. And therefore he teaches us that during slavery, the same slave master who owned us put his last name on us to denote that we were his property. So that when you see a Negro today who's named Johnson, if you go back in his history, you'll find that he was once, his grandfather or one of his forefathers was owned by a white man who was named Johnson. If his name is Bunch, his grandfather was owned by a white man that was named Bunch.
Would you mind telling me what your father's last name was?
My father didn't know his last name.
What if science could help erase racism once and for all? Hey everyone, it's Natalia Reagan back at it again at D News. First of all, it is time that we start teaching our kids as soon as they can talk, and adults for that matter, that there is no biological basis for racial classification. In terms of biology, race doesn't exist. Now that's not to say race isn't real, though it's important to understand that race is a cultural construct, that humans created this and it has nothing to do with our biology. There are no distinct genetic boundaries for the groups commonly called races. Traditionally, scientists have used race to refer to a subspecies, and what determines a subspecies from a species varies among taxa. But in humans, there are no distinct genetic boundaries for the groups commonly called races, and we only have 0.1% variation within our own species versus chimpanzees, which have from 0.3 to 0.7% variation. Now, there is genetic variation within and between populations, but it is quite small. And the most amount of genetic variation found within our species isn't between those of European and African ancestry, it's between various populations within Africa. This is called the founder effect, or reduced genetic diversity in a population founded by a small number of individuals. Now, scientists refer to races as populations or ethnic groups, and many of the physical characteristics that are associated with race are due to adaptations to climate and environment. This can include skin color, height, nose shape. These slight morphological differences are called clines. They are genetic adaptations to the environment over time in a geographic area. As biological anthropologist Todd Disotell would say, it's about clines, not clades, meaning the variations between populations of our species are rather small versus being another branch in the old evolutionary family tree. agree. There's also the idea that certain races are more susceptible to certain illnesses, such as heart disease and diabetes in African Americans. However, extensive research has shown that these illnesses are highly correlated with diet, stress, and socioeconomic standing. Thus, it's a lot more complex than just saying certain races are more likely to suffer from certain illnesses than others.